The NTSB preliminary report is out on the crash from Nanwalek, Alaska that took the life of Daniel Bunker, the pilot, passenger Jenny Irene Miller, and a third passenger was seriously injured in what appears to be a stall spin crash. Let's check it out. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the BLANCOLIRIO channel, and this video is brought to you by viewers like you that support this channel here on Patreon. Thank you for your support. And to get a better feel for this accident, I went into MS 2020 Flight Simulator to get a better idea of the terrain of this airstrip and the terrain that this pilot was facing, and recreated the flight path that was described in the NTSB report. I currently own and operate a Cessna 206, a 78 U206G with the Continental IO 550 naturally aspirated engine. The 207 is a stretched version of the 206, though it can carry more payload, is a somewhat less capable aircraft than the 206. The accident flight was operated by Smoky Bay Air, a commercial flight operation out of Homer, Alaska, which offers daily flights to a couple of local destinations, including Nanwalek. And looks like they're currently operating a fleet of 4 206s and 2 Cessna 207s, the stretched version of the 206. The flight from Homer to Nanwalek is just a short 22 nautical mile flight. Looks like Nanwalek is located basically at sea level, or 27 feet, with an 1,800-foot long gravel runway, but has some terrain challenges. Looking at Nanwalek on a 3D view here on Google Earth, you can see it's basically this spit of land here that they're using for the runway, but has rising terrain to the south. The runway runs north-south, and so you typically come in and land, coming around the village and land to the south. Now here's a typical landing from 15 years ago, a great one-wheel landing. Looks like one of the company's 207s. Right on the right main as this runway initially curves around before it straightens out. Now here's a typical departure to the south. Again, that's 206 with a belly pod. So you got to take off towards the rising terrain. So once you break ground, you peel off to the right to remain clear of the rising terrain. At the time of the accident, the winds were out of the south at 9, gusting to 15, but the crosswinds can get pretty strong here at Nanwalek, and here's a good example of a strong crosswind landing. You see the windsock there. And a great job done by these pilots. Challenging conditions. So this accident occurred back on the 20th of May at 13:55 local time. 2 fatal injuries, 1 serious injury. The Smoky Bay Air flight departed Homer, Alaska with 40 gallons of avgas on board, 271 pounds in passenger baggage, and 257 pounds of U.S. mail on board. So with the 3 passengers, the passenger baggage, and the mail, and the 40 gallons of fuel, puts him under the gross weight limit for the 207, but is a pretty good load, probably a couple hundred pounds under the gross weight limit for the Cessna 207. ADSB track data shows that the airplane approached Nanwalek from the north. It momentarily sidestepped to the right of the runway centerline, which was followed by a left once it was parallel with the approach end of runway 19. The airplane was about 100 feet above ground level at the final ADSB captured data point. And again, that's ADSB data, still probably yet needs to be corrected for pressure, altitude, and everything else. So here's the flight path with a bit of an offset and an almost a 90-degree approach to the end of runway 19. Multiple witnesses located on the ground in the vicinity of the airport reported seeing the airplane approaching 19 for landing from over the village. The witness then stated that the airplane increased throttle and entered a steep left bank near the north end of the Nanwalek airport before losing control and spiraling to the ground. Some witnesses reported seeing a dog on the runway when the accident airplane was on final approach. A pilot in a second Smoky Bay airplane a few miles in trail of the accident, also inbound, said that he heard the accident pilot state over the radio, "I'm going around, there's something on the runway," just prior to the accident. The surviving passenger, who reported in a later interview that they were approaching Nanwalek Airport from the village side and recalled the airplane was offset to the right of the runway centerline on final approach. He then stated that the airplane entered a sharp, steeper than normal left bank turn before losing control and spiraling down to the surface. And it looks like the accident site was located right there off the end of runway 19. The airplane came to a rest on the beach about 350 feet northwest of the approach end of runway 19, and then they pulled the wreckage up to higher ground, and that's the way you see it here. During on-site investigation, no pre-impact anomalies were visually observed with the flight control system, but the flap selector was found in the full down position. The 3 propeller blades exhibited rotational signatures indicating that the engine was still running. If we look at the Cessna 207 Pilot Operating Handbook, for a balked landing or a go-around, full power, full prop RPM, wing flaps retract to 20 degrees. You got to get the flaps back to 20 degrees because full flaps in the 207, which is 30 degrees, is just too much drag during a go-round. On the 206, that aircraft has 40 degrees of flaps, and it's very important that you retract the flaps to flaps 20 in the event of a go-around. Here on the expanded version of the balked landing, the wing flap setting should be reduced to 20 degrees immediately after full power is applied. Then, after all obstacles are cleared and a safe altitude and airspeed are obtained, the wing flap should be retracted. The weather at the time of the accident for this report was taken from Seldovia, some 9 nautical miles to the north, where they reported the wind 7 knots gusting to 15 out of the south, 190 degrees, 10 miles visibility. So the big question on all of our minds is, why did the pilot initiate a sharp turn to the left to do his go-around? A sharp turn to the left would put him in this rising terrain just to the north of the village. Now let's go to the MS 2020 and see what the conditions are like. And I love using this MS 2020 flight sim program. Anytime I'm going to go into the Idaho backcountry, I first pre-fly those flights, approaches and landings in this simulator using the Cessna 206 aircraft. I don't have a Cessna 207 aircraft to show you because the terrain in this flight sim program is so very accurate, and it gives you a very clear idea of just how tight some of these spots are for the pilots flying into them. And for these simulations, I'm using this Logitech controller, which is not the greatest simulation, but the more important point is the terrain involved. Okay, let's try a go around to the left, full flaps. Heavily loaded with the gusty winds. This will be a left turn into rising terrain and a downwind turn. Just the worst possible case. Too slow. Go around, dog on the runway, leaving the flaps at 40 in the 206. Be flaps 30 in the 207, and look how high that terrain is right there. And there's the stall. Okay, we've reset our parameters. Got flaps 20. Now on this 206 simulator, it only gives me flaps 40. I don't have a flaps 30 position. Like the 207. Let's try a different kind of go around. Instead of racking it around to the left, I can see why I wouldn't, from this angle, want to go around She says, dog on the runway, go around. With these gusty winds, what if you just fired straight ahead up this canyon? And if the winds are out of the south off my right wing, if I sashayed over here to the terrain on the left, I should presumably get some lift. Now that's with the full flaps. Get those flaps to 20 like they're supposed to be for the go-around, even if you'd forgotten them. This terrain does rise, but not so dramatically that you couldn't outclimb it at max gross weight, I bet you, in the 207. Now, like Idaho mountain flying, you could get up here to a wide spot in the canyon, which already looks pretty wide to me, get plenty of speed to deal with these gusty winds, and then make a right-hand turn into the wind and get yourself out of here. Keeping those flaps at 20. Getting me out of here. You could probably just zoom straight out over the ocean from here. Okay, so there's one go-round option. And back over the airfield. This time we're going to try a go-round down the runway towards the rising train. Again, we're flaps 40 for the 206 simulator. It would be flaps 30 in the 207. Max gross weight with the gusty winds. Coming in around the village and then turn in towards the runway. 250 feet. Something on the runway. Let's see, there's 180 feet. Go around. Now, with the flaps still at 40, if you forget the flaps, let's see how this works out. Can you make it off to the right here okay? With the flaps at 40. And it seems like that would be a better option. Let's get the flaps to 20 like they're supposed to be for a go-around. And we'll get that vertical speed from 300 feet per minute to well over 1,000 feet per minute. Flaps 20 for the go-around. So for those of you that fly out of here regularly, what are the best go-around options from this point on this approach? Is going down the canyon a consideration? Why did Dan turn so hard to the left? We may never know that. These aircraft do have a tremendous amount of torque and left-turning tendencies in a go-around. Also, too, you've got a lot of nose-up trim set for the flare and the landing. When you initiate the go-around with that full power, that's going to give you a lot of nose pitch up to contend with as well. So the nose is going to be pitching up, and you're going to need to crowd a whole bunch of right rudder to deal with the left-turning tendencies. Because the one thing I cannot accurately simulate in these simulations is the startle factor, or the surprise factor of a short notice go-around. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.